Okay, so the next question says a tax on labor income blank, which subsequently blank the equilibrium quantity of labor. And we have answer choice 1 is increases the supply of labor and increases. Answer choice 2 says decreases the supply of labor and decreases. Answer choice 3 says increases the demand for labor and increases. And 4 says decreases the demand for labor and decreases. So what we're dealing with here is the labor market, right? So let's draw out our graphs once again. We have wages on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis. We have a demand curve, demand for labor, and that's going to be in the form of employers. And then we have our supply curve, our supply of labor, and that's in the form of employees. And so in equilibrium, we have an equilibrium wage, right? Wage star, and we have an equilibrium employment level, Q star, right? And so this is our labor market. Pretty simple. Again, just to review, there's a misconception that supply of labor is going to refer to the number of jobs. That's not the case. It's going to be referring to a number of people willing to work at a given wage. If we are to increase wages, then more people would be willing to work. If we were to decrease wages, less people would be able to work. And that's why supply of labor is upward sloping. At the same time, demand for labor is downward sloping because if we want employers to pay high wages, then they can only afford or only want to pay for a few workers. And if we tell them they can pay very low wages, then they can afford to employ a lot of workers. And that's going to explain the downward sloping nature of the demand curve. And so the question is, a tax on labor income, what does that do? Does it affect supply? Does it affect demand? If it affects supply or demand, does it increase or decrease those aspects of the labor curve? And so a tax on labor income refers basically to income tax, right? And so who does income tax affect more? Does it affect employers, which would mean it would affect the demand curve? Or does it affect suppliers of labor, which would mean it would affect the supply curve? And so the question is, of course, the income tax is going to affect the suppliers, the people who are in the labor force, because it reduces the amount of wages that people actually take home when they work for a certain wage, right? So if I worked for a wage star, I would actually only take home this much money, right, instead of wage star amount of money, because some of that money is getting taxed. And so it's going to be affecting the supply curve. So we can eliminate answer choice 3 and 4. The next question is, okay, if it affects the supply curve, does it increase the supply of labor or does it decrease the supply of labor? And again, we have to think, well, income tax is going to reduce the amount of money that people take home when they are paid a certain wage. And in that fact, it decreases the incentive to work. So it's going to be a factor or determinant that decreases the supply of labor, right? And we're going to visualize that as a leftward shift in the supply curve. So this leftward shift is going to be our new supply curve, which gives us a new equilibrium at W2 and Q2. And so what we've seen is the answer to the first part of the question is that a tax on labor income is going to decrease the supply of labor, and that subsequent change is going to cause a decrease in the equilibrium quantity of labor as well. We used to have Q star level of employment, and now we have Q2 level of employment. And so the answer to the second part of the question is decreases as well. And so the correct answer is going to be answer choice 2. A tax on labor income decreases the supply of labor, which subsequently decreases the equilibrium quantity of labor. And we can take a look at the previous tutor's answer. So the previous tutor also said answer choice 2 decreases the supply of labor and decreases. And they say that the imposition of a tax on labor income reduces the incentives to work when a proportion of the income earned by workers goes to tax. This leads to a reduction in the supply of labor that causes the supply curve to shift to the left. The reduction in the supply consequently causes a decrease in the equilibrium quantity of labor. The equilibrium quantity of labor decreases as the cost of labor has increased for businesses due to the tax. The workers now require a greater income to offset the effect of the tax. Again, great answer. Explains all the things that we talked about. We just want to make sure, be familiar with the labor market graph. And so other than that, the solution is correct, and we can move on to the next answer, the next question.